What we have just witnessed is a portrayal that has been kept alive of the survivors coming through the streets. It's been called Pilgrim Progress. Its centennial is this year. It's a reminder that those who came across the ocean, as Bradford said, were ready to perish in this wilderness. But they cried to the Lord, He heard their voice and looked on their adversity. The monument on top of Coles Hill, called sarcophagus, meaning tomb, has on its back these words, though on its front were the names of those who perished that you just heard. Reader, history records no nobler venture for faith and freedom than that of this pilgrim band. In weariness and painfulness, watchings often, in hunger and cold, they laid the foundations of a state wherein every man through countless ages should have liberty to worship God in his own way. May their example inspire thee to do thy part in perpetuating and spreading the lofty ideals of our republic throughout the world. Thank you to those who have portrayed these 102 and the 51 that survived. You may now come and sit right next to the stage in the seats that have been provided. Thank you. But why did these pilgrims come? It was clear that they came, as it says in their own writings, with a great hope and inward zeal for propagating and advancing the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in those remote parts of the world, yea, though they would be stepping stones unto others for the performing of so great a work. These ideals are reflected in their underlying covenant formed in 1606 in Scrooby. It said they shook off this yoke of anti-Christian bondage, joined themselves as the Lord's free people by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate in the fellowship of the gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known or to be made known, whatsoever it should cost them. This covenant with God and one another allowed them the fortitude to withstand the fear of death, disappointment, discouragement, endless delays, financial loss. The very things we just faced as a nation and the world in a pandemic. We ought to own today the same trust in providence that they did, for God truly had a purpose in all things. Let us not forget, however, that the hill that I face and that many of you sit on was a scene for the natives of Patuxet, who inhabited this hill and had lost nearly 2/3 of their number from 1616 to 1619. Virtually all who lived here had perished. David Silverman writes, if the Wampanoags are as much our fellow Americans as the descendants of the Pilgrims, if their history can be as instructional and inspirational as that of the English, then why focus exclusively on colonist struggles? I agree. I believe the stories of both cultures need to be told. For struggle and suffering levels the playing field and unites us more than divides us. I want to thank Ken Tavares, president of Plymouth 400, Michelle Pecoraro, who's here, executive director, and especially Linda Coombs. You have tirelessly worked to let us hear the rest of the story. Thank you so much. Now, these English immigrants were not plentiful, they weren't wealthy or influential or had much fame. So why rehearse their significance today? Bradford wrote, I wrote this for their children that they may see what difficulties their fathers wrestled in going through these things in their first beginnings and how God brought them along. Maybe that's the first reason we ought to be here today, but others are also clear. On that rock, faith stepped. Why? Because the Pilgrims came as a church. This town can trace its history to a church plant from England and Holland. The majority of the tiny band had faith in God, a relationship with their Creator through Jesus Christ, the great mediator. as Jim Baker, who I would like to thank personally and openly for helping me research in the archives for so many years. He has reminded us that in 1720, the pastor of the first church in Plymouth, Reverend Ephraim Little, made a century festival in 1720 at the Centennial. A wooden dish of Indian corn and clams to represent how they were fed in 1620, and then an elegant dinner to show what it was like in 1720. A simple but profound statement of a contrast by a pastor here in Plymouth. In 1741, Thomas Fonts, the elder of the first church, who served Ephraim Little as a worship leader, was now 95. He heard about a wharf that would be torn down in Plymouth and was moved to tears since the rock the pilgrims stepped on was underneath it. Why, how would he know that? He declared he had heard it directly from his father, who had heard it from William Bradford. It was checked out, and truly he was 8 years old when Bradford was still alive. James Thatcher, in his 1832 work on the history of Plymouth, put it this way: having pointed out the rock directly beneath the bank of Coles Hill, which his father had assured him was that very spot where the footsteps of our fathers had arrived and which should be perpetuated to posterity, he bedewed it with his tears and bid it an everlasting adieu. But the rock was marked, and it stayed for posterity. In 1820, at the bicentennial for the coming of the pilgrims at this time, Daniel Webster, the orator who came here and spoke on Forefathers' Day, said this: "Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light. They labored in its hope. They sought to incorporate all the principles and elements into their society and diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, literary. Let us cherish the sentiments and extend this influence more widely in the full condition and conviction that that is the happiest society which partakes in the highest degree of mild and peaceable spirit of Christianity." In 1920, at the 300th anniversary, Calvin Coolidge came and stood near Plymouth Rock, and he said this: "It does not mark a beginning or an end. It marks a revelation of that which is without beginning or end, a purpose shining through eternity with resplendent light, undimmed by the imperfections of men, and a response and answering purpose from those who, oblivious, disdainful of all else, sought only an avenue for the immortal soul." At the 350th in 1970, on the direction of John G. Talcott Jr., as chairman, Charles Wolfe as executive director, Reverend Billy Graham stood here, and he said this: "The pilgrims had a vision and a hope. They lived in the dimension of eternity. Their strength was forged by a personal faith in Christ, tough discipline, regular habits of devotion. So I say to you, 350 years after the Pilgrim Fathers landed in the New World, dream great dreams, embrace great principles, renew your hope, but above all, like them, believe in God, who alone can give total meaning and an ultimate goal to your life. For in him we live and move and have our being." And in 1995, at the 375th, under the direction of Brian Alosi, we witnessed citizens proudly swearing an oath of citizenship after witnessing a reenactment of the landing as we saw today. We thank Brian for his work 25 years ago to help us remember. As many orators of past commemorations have indicated, the pilgrims' motive for coming here was indeed faith. But not just faith stepped on that rock, families stepped on that rock. Peggy Baker, whom I thank directly and personally for the many hours she directed me through the archives of Pilgrim Hall Museum. That's where I got my start. That was my second library. My secretaries would actually call before there were cell phones. Have to disturb the secretary to notify me. I just got lost in the books. But Peggy Baker wrote this several years ago. Family was at the heart of the Pilgrim story. That makes Plymouth Colony unique amid a sea of other settlements, English, Dutch, French, Spanish alike, that were almost exclusively masculine. The separatist movement from its earliest beginnings was built around strong and dedicated families. 24 family units came on the Mayflower, 18 married women, 78% of whom died the first winter. 3 of the women were pregnant when they left Plymouth, England on September 6th. In addition, there were 35 children, 2 being born on board the Mayflower, 33 others ranging in age from 1 to 17. The Pilgrim Maid Monument in Brewster Gardens, the Pilgrim Mother Monument here on the waterfront, they depict it well. For on the base of Pilgrim Mother Monument it says this: "They brought up their families in sturdy virtue, a living faith in God without which nations perish." May we as Americans never forget that, like the Pilgrim Monument illustrates, family is the fountain of society. But not only that, exploration and innovation stepped on this rock. The cracked beam during the voyage of the Mayflower could have ended their entire journey. Whether it was a jack, part of a printing press, or some other mechanism, innovation required them to continue the exploration. And as Bradford said, they committed themselves to the will of God to proceed. I want to thank publicly as well, in this town we ought to Ellie Donovan, to Richard Pickering, Rob Clune, Whit Perry, and many others at Plymouth Patuxent Museum for their sacrifice in restoring Mayflower II and the shallop, that future generations might see what you just saw. We recognize that our nation must continue to respect ingenuity, individual enterprise, local business. Solutions in America have always arisen from volunteers at the bottom. They never waited for orders from the top. But self-government stepped on this rock. Having blown off course and ended up anchored in Provincetown Harbor, it all could have ended there. Extending the teaching of their pastor, they formed that civil covenant which you just heard. The Provincetown Pilgrim Monument, the compact memorial, display the truths graphically. And they do that because they took an oath to the rule of law. They did not take an oath to the leader of a church or a state. And we should be thankful that legacy has remained. But liberty of conscience stepped on this rock. By and large, pilgrims were people of the book. They were inspired by reading the Geneva Bible. First Bible small enough to carry, cheap enough to own, with notes in the margins, with chapters and verses. It was truly a study Bible. But this required freedom. Freedom to live, freedom to read, and freedom to express ideas that might not be popular. May we today begin to respect again one another's point of view and be willing to hear another's. If we differ with someone, could we please say that with a civil demeanor? And could we at least be willing to listen when someone has a different point of view? Let Burial Hill on the top of Leyden Street, where the Fort Meeting House once stood, forever declare to our town and our nation the free spirit of debate, discussion, and respect produces new ideas based on the freedom of conscience to speak our mind. The graves of our forefathers cry out, it is possible to get along in unity even if we disagree. But economic choice stepped on that rock. When the Pilgrims found themselves starving due to the businessmen in England who would rather protect their own profit than deal with others' success, they chose to initiate a change. They began to think how they might raise as much corn as they could. They might not still languish in misery. What did they do? When personal incentive and responsibility was introduced and setting corn for every family, they began to work. And their production in 1 year tripled. The gristmill, the Jenny Interpretive Center are places where you can learn more about these ideas that formed our town. As Americans, let's once again remember that innovation, ingenuity in the marketplace, where all play by the same rules without giving favors to different people, that will bring true prosperity. But gratefulness came on this rock as well. It was the native Wampanoag that initiated peace with the English. First Samoset, then Massasoit initiated an alliance of peace. Though it was never perfectly kept, it lasted more than 50 years. That alliance has led to the opportunity of these pilgrims that they had. Thank God the pilgrims had enough within them that when they made the mistakes on Cape Cod, they went back and they apologized to the Nauset tribe for the the conduct of Thomas Hunt, who in 1614 took 22 captives. The Wampanoag here had every reason to defend themselves against more Englishmen coming here who had plundered them in the past. You had to overcome those. May we learn today as Americans, you can overcome the poor reputation of the past by exemplary character in the future and the present. Let's do that. As Silverman writes again, despite the Narragansett threat looming over the colony, the English had good reason to pause for celebration. In late November, the colony had survived a terrible first winter, death of half its population. The leadership had forged an alliance with Osamequin, or Massasoit, the most powerful sachem in the immediate area. Both parties had demonstrated their commitment to defending the other. It's a very good, laudable thing to both the native and the English that the peace treaty lasted 50 years. The sad part about it, it's probably the longest lasting treaty with Native Americans in the entire country. May we say going forward, we need that federal apology for the Trail of Tears. We need the proper apologies, but then we need to move forward. For that rock is also a rock of immigration. The immigrant statue in Brewster Gardens reminds this of us. What can we learn from these immigrants? Well, in summary, I say this. If it were not for their faith, they wouldn't have come. There'd be no Mayflower, no statues on these shores. We would not be here 400 years later. When they stepped on the rock, the values of faith, family, innovation, self-government, liberty of conscience, economic freedom, and thanksgiving all came with them. It was the most precious commodity in the hold of that ship. Let us now, 400 years after their landing, recognize it's not just the rock, it's not the monuments. Jamestown may be the national birthplace of America in 1607, but Plymouth came already self-governed, not just by the 69 villages of the Wampanoag Nation, but also on board the ship. In other words, self-government founded this town, and that's why it's America's hometown. The peace and friendship initiated by the Wampanoag, reciprocated by the English, demonstrates today there is more that unites us than divides us. It is evident that both native and pilgrim worship the same Creator. They both testified about that. Let us resolve to initiate peace with our neighbors. If you disagree, if people are rubbing you the wrong way, you go out of your way and initiate peace with your neighbor. You feed the poor. You go to those in your neighborhood and say, how can I bless you? Don't wait for someone else to do it. We don't have to divide and fracture more than we already are, for a culture of divisiveness is around us. We don't have to accept the myth that our differences mean we hate one another. Not so. Our forefathers and the natives who occupied these shores demonstrated two cultures can get along by emphasizing what they agree, not what that disagrees and what causes them division. In fact, we honor the Wampanoag here today as we started this because they are the people of the dawn. May there be a dawning in this nation today going forward of a new peace and alliance with your neighbor and one another. For we can possibly say and change the difference. It only takes one person to start a change for the change of difference. Thomas Faunce bathed Plymouth Rock in his tears. And as Thatcher wrote, standing on this rock, what honors shall we pay to the fathers of our country, founders of an empire, which through countless ages, with the rich abode of knowledge, religion, freedom, and virtue. Criminal indeed would be it, were we not to cherish a religious sense of the exalted privileges inherited by our pious ancestors. Let us resolve to transmit them unimpaired to our children. Abraham Lincoln said, let's highly resolve that the dead shall not have died in vain. Let us defend the values that stepped on this rock, from the native warrior to the citizen soldier and the veterans all among us. Let us give honor to whom honor is due. If we do, America's hometown will continue to be what Bradford said, as one small candle lighting 1,000, so the light here kindled can shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. Let's give the mighty name of Jehovah all the praise.